They told her to wait outside the hangar. No flight assignment, no call sign, not even a seat at the mission table. She stood in the shadow of a rusted jet intake while junior pilots recited protocols she had written. Her name never spoken. The others passed her without pause, assuming she was logistics or admin, someone from supply who'd wandered too close. And then, everything changed. An unscheduled aircraft returned early, broadcasting nothing but static. The tower froze. No one could identify the signature except her. What happened next was never meant to be recorded, but it was, and someone, somewhere, finally asked the right question. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The air inside the Gulf Command briefing room was chilled by industrial vents, but it couldn't hide the heat soaked into the concrete from hours of sun. Polished tile reflected low desert light from the windows behind the projection screen, and the scent of dust, mixed with synthetic leather, from the folding chairs arranged in a strict, angular grid. Officers filed in by unit and flag, each row marked with laminated cards bearing names of partner nations. Some wore sharp, creased jumpsuits in powder blue or charcoal gray. Others wore olive flight suits with custom unit patches stitched bright against their shoulders. Every movement was tight, clipped, rehearsed. The posture of those who expected to be heard. Leah sat 3 rows from the back. Her chair had no name card. Her flight suit was U.S. Navy standard. Sleeves rolled once. Collar zipped just short of the top. No unit patches. No custom insignia. Her shoulder bore only the faded arc of the Tomcat nameplate. The edge of the stitching, worn smooth. In her lap was a binder, thick with tabbed pages and colored flags marking cross-national flight protocol. One of them was folded in a perfect triangle, an old air gesture page, labeled pre-engagement signals. Revision 4. D. She didn't flip to it. She already knew what it said. At the front of the room, the Gulf Air Commander tapped a control panel to lower the screen. The projector warmed with a soft hum and spilled a faded satellite image across the wall. A younger liaison officer, standing beside him, scanned the roster aloud. He listed unit designations with smooth bilingual cadence. U.S. Navy, Royal Air Force, Coastal Flight Division 2, Emirati Tactical Wing 3. When he reached the final page, he glanced back toward Leah's row, hesitated, and read, Embedded Observer, United States Navy Exchange Program, Officer Leah Raymond. The pause said everything. He didn't look at her. The slide advanced. Leah kept her expression even. She had not expected more. A pilot in the second row, wearing a gleaming Gulf State insignia and polished kneeboards, leaned toward his neighbor and said something low in Arabic. She understood enough to catch the tone. The neighbor chuckled, then glanced back at her with a grin that disappeared when she didn't react. From the other side of the aisle, a U.S. aircrew commander adjusted his seat and muttered just loud enough to carry. Didn't know the Tomcats came with translators now. A few smirks followed. No one corrected him. The map on the screen zoomed in on the international corridor, a wedge of sea south of the Delta Shelf. The briefer's voice continued through call sign procedures and escalation ladders. Leah's fingers remained still against the binder. She could feel the laminate ridges of the flight signal tabs beneath her gloves. Her face gave nothing away. Each squadron was assigned its airspace and altitude block. High-ready units were placed forward, interceptors on outer loops, radar relay craft in staggered orbits. U.S. Super Hornets and Royal Typhoons took center escort routes. Leah's aircraft, labeled Escort Delta 3, was noted with a footnote in the corner of the chart. Support asset. No radar active. No weapons armed. She listened as her name was left off the active comm ladder. Another officer, 1 row up, leaned toward his Gulf counterpart and gestured lazily toward the board. F-14 still flying. I thought they retired those in the 90s. The Gulf officer shrugged. Only here. Some of them still think it's honorable. The first replied, or nostalgic. Then, both turned away. The next segment covered visual deconfliction and engagement containment. Leah raised her hand once briefly. The briefer paused, surprised. She kept her tone neutral. Will the legacy signal package be included in visual fallback, or are we defaulting to blink codes only? There was a pause. Someone coughed. The liaison officer blinked at her, confused. We don't use the old signals, he said finally. This is a digital lock theater. Protocols are updated. Leah nodded once. That was all. The briefer moved on. Several heads turned, some amused, others confused. She did not speak again. The projector flickered as the desert wind outside shifted, dust on the glass casting faint shadows across the image. Her name never reappeared on the slides. No one asked her opinion on the corridor layout or the weather shift expected at 0700. She was not dismissed. She was not addressed. She was simply there, a folded name, a placeholder. By the end of the briefing, as chairs scraped and boots moved toward coffee urns, Leah stood in silence. The edge of her flight suit sleeve brushed against the binder in her hand. Her thumb tapped once against the corner flag marker, 4 Delta, folded carefully in the shape of a downwing. Her aircraft might have been old. Her role might have been quiet, but her memory was precise. She stepped out into the sunlit corridor with nothing left to prove. She had already marked what they missed. The Gulf shimmered beneath them, a flat pane of heat-rippled salt water stretching to the edge of vision. From 22,000 feet, the boundary between sea and sky blurred into a soft horizon line, distorted by light and temperature. Leah's cockpit vibrated gently with engine resonance, her hands steady on the yoke of the F-14. The sun was climbing fast, already casting a hard glare across her canopy. A single, shallow scratch near the center caught the light with every banking shift, an imperfection she had stopped noticing weeks ago, except when it pointed directly at the line where atmosphere met ocean. The formation moved in practiced rhythm, spaced by doctrine but not trust. 2 Gulf State F-16s held the lead center and port lanes, nose tips sharp and high, canopies reflecting gold. A U.S. Navy Super Hornet anchored the starboard edge, slightly above the others, its external tanks gleaming like polished armor. Leah's Tomcat flew in the rear right quadrant, just outside formal geometry. Her HUD glowed a soft green, older than the others, but reliable. Radar idle, weapons safe. Her role was to observe formation integrity and report deviations if asked. She had not been asked. The radio was active with clipped coordination calls, altitude holds, bearing shifts, fuel checks. The Gulf pilots spoke in English with slight accent shifts, each sentence flat with habit. The American pilot's tone was sharper, more deliberate, as though staking claim to control with every update. None of them addressed Leah. She responded only once, during the initial merge, confirming Escort Delta 3 in position. After that, she let the silence settle. She matched their headings, adjusted for drift, and kept one eye on the telemetry flow. The Tomcat's airframe rumbled more than the others, a deeper engine tone that vibrated through her boots and into her ribs. It was a sound she trusted. 56 miles off the coast, the exercise entered its active simulation zone. Radar threads began to populate the screens in staggered bursts. Ghost contacts, simulated threats, automated identifiers. Leah's displays filtered the noise through low-resolution tracking. She adjusted the range scale with 2 fingers, noting a slight lag between data pulses. It was within margin, but barely. The first indication came as a half-second tone on her threat detection system. Brief, blunt, unacknowledged by anyone else. A moment later, The Gulf 2 pilot adjusted his vector 6 degrees to port. No radio call. The Super Hornet followed after a half beat, maintaining alignment, but shifted altitude slightly. Leah saw the shape of it forming. A second tone, slightly longer, then a voice. Gulf 1 calling for system verification. Confirm all locks are simulated. We are reading live ping. Silence. Then the American pilot's voice, even and precise. Negative hostile lock. SIM package only. Confirmed on mission sheet. Another second passed. Then Gulf 1 again, this time sharper. We are breaking visual. Reading hard mark. One of the F-16s peeled to starboard. Not violently, but enough. Leah watched the maneuver from behind, seeing not just the vector but the posture. It wasn't drift. It was response. The Super Hornet adjusted again. Weapons safeties weren't broken yet, but the tone had changed. The space between them was still clean, but it pulsed with tension. On Leah's HUD, an old telemetry flicker appeared at the screen's bottom edge. A rapid stutter in the signal reflection legacy pattern from a degraded IFF ping. It was an error she had studied before, tucked in the margins of doctrine sheets too old for digital publication. A handshake loop failure. Not hostile. Not spoofed. Just misread. No one mentioned it. Not on the primary frequency. Not on the command net. The formation held barely, but the air was thin now. Leah adjusted throttle slightly, aligning herself with the edge line of the Gulf 2 jet's wash. The turbulence wasn't strong, but it hinted at separation. She keyed her mic and let it hover over transmit, then stopped. She wasn't part of the comm ladder, not authorized to interrupt. The scratch on her canopy bisected the rightmost F-16's tail fin as it twitched again barely, enough to show they were readying for defense. She watched, calculated angles, watched again. Something was unraveling, but her voice wasn't on the roster. She did not speak. She stayed in position, eyes steady, hands quiet, HUD flickering just once more. Soft green over Gulf haze. She saw it. The first movement was too smooth to raise alarm. Gulf 1 adjusted pitch by 3 degrees and rotated left, flattening into a shallow banking turn that kept his nose just off center from the American pilot's trajectory. It could have been nothing. It could have been a routine test of spacing or a sensor recalibration sweep. But Leah watched from behind and saw the second shift, the correction for altitude that came a half second too late. That wasn't a test. That was a reorient. The Super Hornet's wings adjusted next. Not sharply, but with deliberate intent. Its speed held steady, but the spacing closed by meters too quickly for casual formation maintenance. The difference wasn't in the vector. It was in the posture. These weren't birds and crews. They were bracing. Radio traffic was tight, still calm, still measured. The Gulf pilot stated they were reading active signal reflections on sweep intervals. He asked again for the U.S. aircraft to confirm SIM-only status. The American lead acknowledged, but his voice was tighter now. He cited the exercise briefing. Simulation only. No fire control activated. Leah reached for her scale toggle and zoomed the data feed in by increments. Her HUD responded with a low hum and displayed target vector trails in soft green arcs. She ran her eyes over the curve formations, noting how one of the Gulf F-16s had begun subtly favoring a flanking angle. His nose wasn't quite aimed where it should be. The radio didn't catch it, but her instruments did. The Tomcat was old. Her systems weren't built for the aggressive synthesis that modern jets relied on, but the advantage was that nothing filtered out the drift. The raw feed told the truth, even when it made no sense. A second pass on the radar wave pattern confirmed what she already suspected. The signal jump was a handshake error, an artifact of overlapping training frequencies, misread as a lock attempt due to a delay in timing pulse sync. It had happened before, in Bahrain, in old Japan drills, even in mid-Atlantic corridor flights during coastal war games. Leah had annotated the pattern in her binder under false positives, protocol relics. But that binder was 10,000 feet below her. and no one else seemed to remember. The spacing widened again. Gulf 1 banked harder now, calling for visual clearance and altering course by a full 20 degrees. It was still within safety margin, but it was no longer a drill maneuver. It was defensive. The Super Hornet responded in kind, shifting altitude again, this time just slightly above the original formation vector. Neither pilot spoke it aloud, but in posture, they were preparing for escalation. Leah looked out over the canopy edge. Her eyes tracked the sunline across the gulf below. The scratch on the glass bisected the shape of Gulf 1's tail again. In her periphery, her HUD flashed a single red flicker active warning. Not real, not confirmed, but enough to make the hair along the back of her neck tighten. She had no command authority, no tactical override, no place in the comms loop. But she had something else. Buried in an annex of a legacy manual, in a protocol no longer issued, was a line of visual gesture signals shared between U.S. and Gulf Alliance units during the late Cold War period. They had been used during split-band exercises when communications failed and radar returns were compromised. The manual defined only 4 gestures. One of them was a 5-degree downward wing dip. It meant one thing: false lock, stand down. No one used it anymore. It was removed from official doctrine in 1987. But Leah had read it. She had underlined it. And she had practiced the angle on approach descent checks, just to feel it in her hands. She eased her right wing down, not dramatically, not enough to alert anyone else, just a slow, precise, 5-degree dip. She held it for 3 seconds, nose level, engines steady, eyes on Gulf 1's tail. Then she leveled back. Nothing else changed. For a moment, the air held still. Then Gulf 1's altitude dipped. Not defensive, not aggressive. It was a correction, a re-entry to pattern. A moment later, he came over the radio with a clipped statement. Negative contact confirmed, resetting track, returning to posture. The Super Hornet acknowledged. The formation stabilized. Leah said nothing. She did not log the maneuver. She did not signal a deviation. She returned her wing to standard posture, reduced throttle slightly, and let the Tomcat slide back a quarter length. Her HUD flickered once more. The red alert vanished. The Gulf rolled beneath them, smooth and unbroken. The comms ladder returned to standard callouts. Fuel balance, formation checks, target vector realignment. The control net made no mention of the shift. No one requested debrief footage. The official record would list a brief radar echo delay and standard visual realignment. Exercise, proceeding as expected. Leah kept her eyes forward. Her instruments glowed soft green again. The sun struck her canopy glass at a new angle, and the scratch disappeared from her sightline. In the silence, she eased back into position and resumed her place on the escort line. A gesture remembered, a signal received. No one else said a word, and that was enough. The debrief room had no windows, just concrete walls painted light gray and long fluorescent tubes that hummed faintly overhead. The temperature stayed several degrees too cold, despite the desert heat pressing just outside the sealed door. A wide digital display stretched across the front wall, divided into data columns and replay feeds. Beneath it, 2 rows of modular desks faced the screen, each equipped with headset jacks, hardline terminals, and small touchpads that blinked in idle mode. The chairs filled slowly. Gulf officers arrived first, uniforms crisp, voices quiet, clipped in formal Arabic. A few U.S. Instructors filtered in next, coffee in hand, boots dusted from the flight line. No one spoke much. The morning sortie had ended without escalation. The report said, clean run. All systems nominal. Radar ping drift noted. No hostile engagement. No event flagged for review. Leah entered last. She didn't take a seat. She stood near the rear wall, her helmet hanging by the chin strap in her left hand. Its surface was dulled from wear. Dust and oil streaked across the visor edge. Her flight suit bore no fresh insignia, just the same faded nameplate and a stain near the right cuff, where hydraulic fluid had soaked through during a pre-flight check 2 days earlier. She said nothing, just shifted her weight slightly to the right and watched as the lead tech brought up the playback. The room dimmed as the projection filled with grainy overlay footage, white lines tracing aircraft movement, altitude stamps, throttle flow, distance measurements between units. The simulated radar threads appeared next, glowing blue arcs stitched over the airspace grid. Timecode marked each second at the bottom, ticking up toward 100.0. Gulf 1's maneuver sequence came into view. A slight divergence. Speed maintained. No deviation called. The instructor running the playback nodded to himself, noting system lag at marker 91 and brief comm irregularity at marker 95. Leah kept her eyes on the screen. Her hands stayed still. The instructor moved past the moment. Then he paused, narrowed his eyes, and backed the footage up by 10 seconds. Marker 97. There, in the lower corner of the trace, a subtle shift. One aircraft escort Delta III dropped wing angle just slightly. The tail trace sloped 5 degrees down, then returned to level after 3 seconds. No roll, no brake, just a dip. Almost imperceptible. A voice spoke from the front row. It belonged to an older Gulf instructor, his uniform sleeves rolled up neatly, his collar pressed flat despite the late hour. His eyes stayed on the screen as he leaned forward, squinting at the playback. "That's the signal," he said. The words weren't loud. He didn't direct them to anyone in particular, just spoke them into the silence, like naming something half-remembered. No one replied. The playback resumed. The American instructor at the console blinked but didn't pause again. He kept moving forward, citing formation re-entry and track stabilization at marker 100.5. A Gulf pilot noted comm restoration at 100.6, adding that the spacing was rebalanced in line with training protocol. The rest of the room agreed. Nothing further. Standard drift. No engagement. The older instructor didn't say anything else. He sat back slowly, arms folded across his chest, gaze still fixed on the screen. His lips moved once, silent. Then he looked toward the back of the room. Leah stood exactly where she had been, helmet still in hand, eyes calm. She didn't blink. He met her gaze. Just once. A quiet recognition passed between them. Not theatrical, not staged. Then the moment faded. The debrief moved on to fuel consumption comparisons and secondary tracking overlays. No one mentioned marker 97 again. No one flagged it in the report. The lights rose. The room emptied. Leah waited until the screen powered down, leaving only the soft overhead glow. She walked to the far door without rush, boots quiet against the tile. She didn't look back. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a long shadow across the edge of the hangar wall. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying a mix of jet exhaust and fine sand across the tarmac. Aircraft stood silent along the outer line, sun glinting off cockpit glass. The sky above them was empty now. Quiet. Leah crossed the ramp to the shade of the utility shelter where she'd stowed her flight bag. She placed the helmet inside, zipped the compartment, and wiped her gloves once against her thigh. She did not reach for her tablet. She did not check the log. Across the base, the younger pilots were already gathering for meal rotation and mission prep for the evening sim cycle. A few of them laughed near the water station. One carried a printout from the debrief, already folded in half, notes scrawled in marker. No one mentioned the maneuver. No one asked about the shift. In the corner of the command office, the older Gulf instructor stood at a desk with a hard copy of a protocol sheet open in front of him. It was marked Rev 4 Delta, printed in 1986. A line on the page was underlined twice. Wing dip, 5 degrees, stand down. He tapped the edge of the paper once with a pen. Thoughtful. Then he folded the sheet closed and slid it into his case. He did not speak her name. He didn't need to. The base had quieted by nightfall. The heat had slipped away, replaced by a breeze that carried the scent of salt and jet fuel across the tarmac. Hangar lights buzzed low and amber, casting long reflections off the maintenance bay doors, out past the perimeter fence. The horizon blinked with the soft white lights of a carrier far offshore. From her window, Leah could just make out the faint pulsing of the deck beacons, like a signal passed between machines across dark water. She walked slowly along the row of utility sheds, her boots scuffing against the concrete. Most of the other quarters had their shades drawn, voices carried only in muffled pairs, techs closing down, a few ground crew trading shift notes under low yellow lamps. Leah said nothing. Her flight bag rested over one shoulder, the strap worn and slightly frayed where it met the canvas. Inside her quarters, everything was in order. The space was small bed against the far wall, desk beneath the lone overhead light, locker shut and latched. A flight suit hung neatly from the rack. Her boots stood aligned at the foot of the bed. On the desk, an open binder lay beside a folded cloth towel and a capped pencil. The binder's edges were curled from years of travel. One of the pages was taped against the inner cover, protected by a plastic sheet. Across the top, printed in faint, aging ink, it read, Pre-engagement signal protocol. Revision 4 Delta. The diagrams beneath were outlined in red pencil, each corner notated with small script initials and exact angle measurements. Leah unzipped her bag, pulled out her gloves, and set them beside the binder. She reached for the pencil, turned it once in her fingers, then let it rest along the binder's spine. The knock came just before 2200. Not loud, just 2 short taps against the metal frame of the door. She didn't flinch. She opened the latch and pulled the door halfway wide. Standing just outside, his posture stiff but eyes focused, was the younger Gulf pilot from the day's sortie. His flight suit was still on, collar loose now, sleeves pushed to the elbows. A sheen of salt marked his hairline. He didn't carry a tablet. No notebook. Just a faint line of creased tension across his brow. He met her eyes directly. Was that signal real, he asked. Leah didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. He entered without comment, brushing past the doorframe with the careful movement of someone raised on formality but reaching beyond it. She gestured toward the desk. He sat, slowly, resting both hands on the edge as he looked down at the binder. Leah crossed to the opposite side and opened the front cover. She turned the pages without rushing, passing over color-coded tabs and old log charts until she reached the marked section. Page 9, Joint Coalition Visual Codes, Legacy Use Only, midway down the column, next to a line diagram of an aircraft with a slight downward bank. The annotation read, Wing dip, 5 degrees, indicates false lock alert. Stand down. Legacy confirmation required. His eyes scanned the diagram. Then he read it again. He didn't speak for a while. Leah leaned forward, tapped once on the right margin where the handwritten note curved beneath the print. The pencil line was soft, but exact. The paper had yellowed slightly with time. He finally asked, why did they stop teaching this? She didn't answer that either. He studied the page again, then looked up at her. I didn't know what I was seeing, he admitted, but when you moved, I stopped reacting. Something in me paused. She nodded once. It's not listed in our doctrine anymore, he continued. I checked after landing. None of the instructors mentioned it. They wouldn't, Leah said. Her voice was even. It was pulled decades ago. He hesitated, then said, Can I make a copy? Leah looked at the binder. Then she looked at him. No, she said. He blinked. But you can learn it, she added. She reached for the pencil and placed it beside him. Then she turned the binder sideways, so it faced his direction. Her finger rested lightly on the angle chart. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. He nodded. For the next half hour, they said very little. She pointed to diagrams. He listened. She rotated a secondary reference sheet forward, showing maneuver context. He asked a question once, maybe twice, about signal hierarchy and visual authority. She responded with short, measured sentences. They spoke like two people passing information underwater. Slowly, cleanly, as if speed would break the thread. When they reached the end of the page, he sat back and exhaled once through his nose. "I won't forget it," he said. "You're not supposed to," Leah replied. He looked toward the doorway, then back at the binder. "Did anyone else see?" he asked. She didn't answer. He stood slowly, careful not to shift the papers out of place. As he moved toward the door, he paused. His hand hovered over the latch. "I don't know what you were supposed to be today," he said, "but I'm glad you were where you were." Leah offered a faint nod. "Nothing more." He left without further comment. The door clicked shut behind him. She sat down again at the desk, closed the binder, returned the pencil to the spine and adjusted the corners of the towel beside it. Outside, the breeze carried a gust of fine grit across the window. Carrier lights continued to blink offshore, steady and distant. Leah leaned back slightly in her chair, eyes on the edge of the protocol sheet still visible through the plastic cover. She wasn't rewriting doctrine. That wasn't her job. She was just making sure it wasn't lost. The morning came soft and slow over the Gulf. Pale light crept in behind the hangars, casting long amber shadows across the flight line. The breeze was gentler than it had been the night before, just strong enough to lift grit off the edge of the tarmac and scatter it across the concrete pads. Most of the aircraft sat in silence, dark canopies closed, maintenance crews still 30 minutes from call time. Inside the review room, 2 instructors leaned over a monitor that played back the previous day's sortie footage. They spoke quietly, tired from a long cycle, but curious about the angle shift in the escort footage. One of them paused the screen at marker 97. He tilted his head, frowned, then let out a single amused breath. He didn't say Leah's name. He didn't need to. The dip was precise, just enough to be intentional. He rewound it, watched it again, then shrugged. The screen blinked as he reset the feed for archive. In the locker room, one building over, the younger Gulf pilot opened his storage compartment and smoothed the edges of a printout against the inside panel. It was a still frame from the same footage, pulled from the replay quietly the night before. It showed a formation trace, 4 aircraft in line, with one escort Delta III tipping just off the axis. The label beneath it was written in black marker, 5 degrees low. He stood there for a moment, eyes resting on the photo. Then he shut the locker without a sound. Outside, the base stirred. Fuel trucks hissed along the outer lanes. A few junior crews carried folded ladders toward the line stations. Someone called out for a checklist. A distant radio crackled with updates from the tower. Leah walked alone along the north apron, her steps even, her face calm. She carried no bag. Her gloves were looped through one belt strap, dust already gathering along the soles of her boots. No one stopped her. No one pointed. She didn't head toward the operations tent or the command center. She crossed behind the old hangar where the sunlight hit the east wall full. Her shadow fell long beside her. She never looked back. Inside her quarters, the binder still rested on the desk. The corner of the protocol sheet peeked out beneath a towel. Her flight log sat open. On the last line of the most recent page, in small, printed letters, one entry had been written: "Escort complete." That was all. No notation, no airspace conflict code, no flight deviation, just the line. She closed the log slowly and placed it back in the drawer. Outside, the sound of turbines spooling up signaled another flight block about to begin. She stood by the window for a moment longer, eyes scanning the line of aircraft, the faint shimmer of rising heat, the sky beyond it all. Some gestures were never meant to be documented, just seen, just remembered. And now they were. Leah was never the loudest voice in the room. She didn't demand recognition, didn't push for command. She carried knowledge others had forgotten and acted when it mattered most without waiting for permission. In a sky filled with modern noise and layered protocol, her quiet signal held more weight than any call-out. She reminded us that strength isn't always seen, and leadership doesn't always arrive with a title. Sometimes, It's the pilot no one noticed who steadies the course and prevents what never makes the headlines. If this story spoke to you, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever been overlooked, only to prove yourself in silence? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more quiet, powerful stories of service and courage, consider following this channel. Your presence here helps bring voice to those who never asked for the spotlight.